The information contained in this podcast is an expression of opinion and does not constitute investment advice. This is the Gold Money Foundation podcast with Alasdair Macleod, keeping you up to date with expert opinion on precious metals and the markets.
Hello, this is Alasdair Macleod on behalf of the Gold Money Foundation, and I have with me Ronnie Stöferle, who is the precious metals analyst for Erste Bank. Welcome, Ronnie. It's very nice to meet you.
Hi, Alasdair.
We've got while we're in Zagreb, the gold price is going down and down and down. What sort of vibes are you getting from the people you talk to?
Mostly negative vibes. I mean, it's definitely a bit frustrating. In my presentation, I showed some sentiment numbers, and the sentiment is on an extremely negative, and it's probably the most bearish attitude for the last few years. So that, from a contrarian perspective, it makes me kind of confident. And I mean, I haven't read the papers today, but I don't think that the whole euro crisis is over. I don't think that our problems with over-indebtedness are over. I don't think that our financial system is on solid footing again. And most of all, I don't think that real interest rates turned positive yesterday. So from my point of view, that's just a normal correction within a bull market, but it is definitely some sort of washout.
Yes. For the record, while we're speaking, gold has broken down through the 1600 and is in round about the sort of 1580 level. And it seems to me that the market reaction to the problems in Europe has been to sort of do this risk-off type analysis, whereby anything that's risky or perceived as risky in the market gets hit. But I would have thought that in any logical sense that gold is not, if you like, a risk-off category. It is the hedge against risk, surely. But people are obviously not thinking this way. What do you think?
You're totally right. And in my reports, I always try to explain and explain with numbers and charts why it definitely makes sense to hold gold as some sort of insurance. And there's almost no correlation to bonds. There's slightly negative correlation to equities. The volatility of gold is much lower than for oil and most commodities, but it's also lower than for equities. And I mean, it's one of the few assets that doesn't have any liability attached. It is a currency that cannot be devalued, that never went bankrupt. So it just perfectly makes sense to hold at least 5 to 10%. That's what we are recommending of your holdings in gold. And I don't think that this changed recently. And I think the sentiment at the moment is extremely negative, but I think on a dollar basis, we're still year to date up by 2 or 3%. On a euro basis, we're 7 or 8% below the all-time high. On a 12-month basis, in euro terms, we're up by 14%. I would say that that's not too bad. And the fact that people are getting nervous that easy, that makes me confident that we're far away from being in a euphoria stage. And that's going to be the last stage, and then that's going to be really fun.
Yes. I think that's a very good point you make, that when you see a couple of days where gold goes down $50, $60, you forget actually it has held up very, very well compared with most other investment or investable assets. But the European situation seems to me to be going from bad to worst. Is there any salvation, do you think? What's your opinion? I know this is not precious metals territory, but I'm sure you have a view.
I don't see anything positive on the horizon, honestly, and the whole mood shifted from austerity to stimulating growth recently. and with the elections in France, but also I think the Germans want to stimulate the economy more now, and I don't think it's the right solution. It's basically very Keynesian, and I think Keynes once said that most of his followers are more Keynesian than he is. Yeah, so going forward, I don't see any solution to the problem that we're facing. It's just kicking the can further down the road, and I think some sort of financial repression is the way. I wouldn't say it's a solution, but
that's the way they're going.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. That's interesting what you were saying. Germany is more inclined, have I got this right, more inclined towards some sort of growth solution. I suppose that when you've been throwing your money at somebody else's problem, you probably see this as a substitute for that. Yeah. Is this? Do you think this is what's driving opinion?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. The other thing that's interesting, going back to gold in particular, is that Lars Schall, a journalist, has created a little bit of a debate about the Bundesbank's reserves. And do you get much feedback on that? And is German public opinion very much concerned about these things, or is it just something for the specialist press?
I think the German Bild-Zeitung was covering it. The initiative is called Bringt das deutsche Gold heim, which basically means bring back the German gold. And if the Bild-Zeitung, that is really influential in Germany, if they have got it on their agenda, that definitely means something. And we've seen something similar in Switzerland, for example. Also in Austria, where two parties said we kind of want to know where the Austrian gold is stored. How much is there? When did the last auditing happen? So that's something that definitely picked up some sort of momentum recently, and I think this is gonna continue. And it's pretty obvious that the population wants to know where the gold is located.
So Mr. Schall has started something, we think.
Yeah, he's a good friend of mine, Lars. So.
I met him at the Garter conference.
Yeah.
I thought he was a very able journalist. But it's interesting that this comes at a time when Ron Paul is also putting pressure on the Fed to fess up about the amount of gold they own or don't own. And I'm also interested because the Bank of England, which supervises the London bullion market, presumably operates sight accounts and might indeed have some of your Austrian gold in a sight account there. Now, if Austria wants her gold back, then as a taxpayer in England, I just wonder whether the Bank of England has got it. Changing the topic slightly, how do you view silver, which is not it's sort of partly industrial metal and it's rather than pure monetary? How do you see the price of silver going forward?
Well, I have to admit we don't have any primary coverage on silver, so I don't publish any forecasts on silver. Perhaps I'm going to write a silver report this year. But I always said that in the last stage of this bull market in gold, I think that silver will outperform dramatically. And right now with the ratio at,
so I think it's about 54.
54,
roughly,
yeah.
Yes.
That's just very, very cheap. And I there are a lot of people saying that 1 to 15 is like the historical ratio. I don't totally agree with that because it was during the time of bimetallism, and it was kind of a forced ratio. And when it kind of failed, the market chose gold to be the primary monetary metal. But as I've said, I think that gold will one day become just too expensive, and then people, as they're doing in China at the moment, or also in India, then they're gonna buy more silver, and therefore I wouldn't rule out that we're seeing triple digits for silver, definitely.
Yes, and I think I'm right in saying that they're starting a new futures contract in Shanghai, and presumably that means that the traders will have to build up a stock position in order to be in a position to deliver. So that is very interesting. I think one of the problems in the European Union must be the VAT treatment of silver, and presumably that reduces the potential interest from the point of view of your bank.
Yeah, I mean, the VAT in Austria on silver is 20%. In Germany, it's only 7%. People who really want to buy silver, they buy it over Switzerland or they go to Germany. So there are definitely ways to get silver. But I mean, you have to live with volatility. Yeah, you've got to have really strong nerves. We've seen it last year, hitting 50, and then it dropped to, I don't know, 22, something like that. You have to deal with that, and therefore I think you know right now kind of buying the dips definitely makes sense. But if you're not able to deal with such volatility and drawdowns, then stick to gold.
Yes, it's not been a currency that you sort of just tuck away and go away on a cruise, and it's quite difficult to do that. Well, that's silver. I must admit, I think silver does have a lot of potential, but as you say, the volatility is very dangerous, and anyone who wants to trade it, I think, takes their lives into their own hands. So, America, we've now got the Republican primaries, and so far, just about everyone's dropped out, apart from Mitt Romney and Ron Paul. I'm sort of fascinated to see that Ron Paul has, through his efforts, actually spread the word about Austrian economics in America to a large extent, particularly amongst the young. Do you find that the young in Europe are particularly interested in Austrian economics out of any of the age groups, or not?
I think it's a kind of a very slow process in Europe. And, you know, I've been studying in Vienna, and I hardly heard anything about Austrian economics. I've never heard the name Mises.
And that's in Austria.
And that's in Austria. Perhaps sometimes Hayek. Most of them think that Schumpeter is an Austrian, which I do not agree. I've never heard about Menger before. It's really kind of a shame. And there was the Mises Supporter Summit last summer, and I think there in Vienna, and I think there were around 400 people from all over the world, 40 countries, but there were only roughly 10 Austrians, which is kind of a shame. I think Ron Paul is doing a great job. I really like him, not just because his first name is Ron. I think he's spreading the word, but it's still, especially if you're seeing what's currently going on, it's still a very slow process, and therefore I think that if you're talking to most of the politicians and mainstream media, people in finance industry, you hardly find any Austrians.
Yes, I think that's unfortunately common with every country, and the financial sector really draws down on for economic resources from the major universities, who are all being taught Keynesian, and well, not so much monetarist, but certainly Keynesian economics. And of course, it's Keynesian economics that has driven us to the current crisis. And as Margaret Thatcher said, the problem with socialism is there comes a point when you run out of other people's money, which I know is one of James Turk's favourite sayings. And I think that's my perception of what's happened in Europe. And the reason that Europe has the problem now is that they don't have their own national central banks printing their individual currencies to get them out of trouble. But there is going to come a time, I think, as these various countries get deeper into the mess, that the attention is going to swing back to the pound, back to the dollar, and perhaps there's likely to be a greater examination of government finances in both the US and the UK. Is that something that you're looking ahead towards, and how that might affect the price of gold in particular?
Tough question. I think the fact that the British pound is regarded as a safe haven at the moment
says it all, doesn't it?
That says it all, yeah. And
the new Deutschmark.
It doesn't matter at what number you're looking at. It's just ridiculous. Yeah. We had a dinner last night, and we've been talking about the Eurozone, and I said, yeah, it's kind of like a football team. Yeah, there are a few very talented players who are ambitious. They go to practice. They are in a good physical shape, and then there are perhaps a few who don't have any. Who don't want to play, who don't want to show any effort, who are perhaps too thick, they're not talented, they're showing up drunk at practice or at the games. And it sometimes feels like that in the Eurozone. And there will be probably a moment when those very talented players of the team say, okay, you're just destroying the results that we're having in our football league. And then they're going to say, okay, we'll start a new team, yeah, perhaps.
Or a new league.
Or a new league, yeah, perhaps that's happening.
Yes,
yeah.
that's a very interesting way of putting it, because I think what you're possibly alluding to is the position of Germany in this. I don't know where Austria fits. I mean, does Austria feel that it's with Germany in the sense that if there is a breakup of the Eurozone, that you would more naturally be attached to whatever Germany does than let us say, some of the other countries, which maybe have a little more in common with your economy, perhaps, but I don't know.
Yeah, Germany is definitely the most important market for us, the most important trading partner. The Austrian shilling used to be linked to the Deutschmark. So
was it actually physically linked?
Yeah.
Oh, right, yes.
So I think that would happen, absolutely.
Right, so... and the context where I think this is very important is that when I looked at Germany's position, it struck me that her future growth markets are very much the sort of China, Southeast Asia, Russia, who are buying Mercedes-Benz like nobody's business, Africa still, everywhere but Europe. Europe is no longer, in terms of the future, it's no longer where Germany's growth is going to come from in terms of its export markets. So that would suggest that either she stays with the euro and benefits from, let's say, a lower euro, or she takes the view that the drain on her resources of having to support all the other Eurozone members is too much and has got nothing to do with the future anyway. Do you think that the thinking in Berlin is looking at it this way, or are they just sort of in a mild state of panic and trying to come up with whatever solution fits for the moment?
I'm not sure, but as far as I follow German politics, I don't see any bigger solutions going forward. I think that the pressure on Merkel is getting bigger and bigger. You've got like this Pirates Party, which has a huge following in Germany. It's already getting bigger in Austria as well.
Is the Pirates Party? I mean, tell me a little bit about the Pirates Party. Is that a sort of like an Occupy Wall Street type thing, or
I don't know
or
too much about their real program. I don't know if
they probably don't have one.
Yeah, but perhaps that's also a program. Yeah, and people are kind of they don't like the way that politics was made and is made, so they're kind of fed up. They're against ACTA, they're against the ESM. Besides that, I think they want to, the internet is very positive, which I clearly support. But besides that, I don't know too much about the program, but I think they've got pretty good chances going forward. But for Germany in general, I think they will continue to muddle through.
Yes. So we hear all sorts of stories about contingency plans and the sort of printing Deutschmarks on the quiet and so on and so forth. Do you think there's any credibility in those stories, or is that just internet gossip?
I think the last few years showed me that expect the unexpected is kind of a good idea. I wouldn't rule it out, but I don't think that there's a real plan B. and therefore I don't think that they already printed a Deutschmark. Don't think so.
No, I think that sounds to me like it's sort of internet rumour. So I think we can probably discount that. Well, Ronnie, it's been a great pleasure talking to you, and thank you very much indeed for taking time to do so.
Thank you, Alasdair, or hvala, as they're saying in Croatian. Thank you very much.
I wouldn't know what they say in Croatian.
Hvala.
But thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Subscribe to the Gold Money newsletter at www.goldmoney.com to receive email updates on new articles, videos, and iTunes podcasts from our gold research section.
Any liability attached. It is a currency that cannot be devalued, that never went bankrupt. So it just perfectly makes sense to hold at least 5 to 10%. That's what we are recommending of your holdings in gold. And I don't think that this changed recently. And I think the sentiment at the moment is extremely negative. But I think on a dollar basis, we're still year to date up by 2 or 3%. On a euro basis, we're 7 or 8% below the all-time high. On a 12-month basis, in euro terms, we're up by 14%. I would say that that's not too bad. And the fact that people...
vibes are you getting from the people you talk to?
Mostly negative vibes. I mean, it's definitely a bit frustrating. In my presentation, I showed some sentiment numbers, and the sentiment is on an extremely negative, and it's probably the most bearish attitude for the last few years. So that, from a contrarian perspective, it makes me kind of confident. And I mean, I haven't read the papers today, but I don't think that the whole euro crisis is over. I don't think that our problems with over-indebtedness are over. I don't think that our financial system is on,
if you like, a risk-off category. It is the hedge against risk, surely. But people are obviously not thinking this way. What do you...
You're totally right. And in my reports, I always try to explain and explain with numbers and charts why it definitely makes sense to hold gold as some sort of insurance. And there's almost no correlation to bonds. There's slightly negative correlation to equities. The volatility of gold is much lower than for oil and most commodities, but it's also lower than for equities. And I mean, it's one of the few assets whereas that doesn't have on solid footing again. And most of all, I don't think that real interest rates turned positive yesterday. So from my point of view, that's just a normal correction within a bull market, but it is definitely some sort of washout.
Yes. For the record, while we're speaking, gold has broken down through the 1600 and is in round about the sort of 1580 level. And it seems to me that the market reaction to the problems in Europe has been to sort of do this risk-off type analysis, whereby anything that's risky or perceived as risky in the market gets hit. But I would have thought that in any logical sense that gold is not...
The information contained in this podcast is an expression of opinion and does not constitute investment advice. This is the Gold Money Foundation podcast with Alasdair Macleod, keeping you up to date with expert opinion on precious metals and the markets.
Hello, this is Alasdair Macleod on behalf of the Gold Money Foundation, and I have with me Ronnie Stöferle, who is the precious metals analyst for Erste Bank. Welcome, Ronnie. It's very nice to meet you.
Hi, Alasdair.
We've got while we're in Zagreb, the gold price is going down and down and down. What sort of